Okay, continuing. So we just saw the author of Matthew change the words of Isaiah 7:14 in an effort to make it comport with his story about the circumstances of Jesus' birth, specifically what Jesus would be named and by whom. The bottom line is that the child whose birth is portrayed in Matthew 1 is not named Emmanuel and is never called Emmanuel. Not in Matthew, not anywhere in the New Testament. On this point alone, even if Isaiah 7:14 were a messianic prophecy, Jesus fails to fulfill it. By misquoting the passage, the author of Matthew tries and fails to make it apply. Of course, this is not the only problem that plagues Christian use, or more correctly, misuse, of Isaiah 7:14. There's also the matter of whether the young woman to whom Isaiah referred was called a virgin. As I suspect many people watching this already know, the Hebrew word in the passage referring to the woman is ha'alma, the young woman. The word is used 7 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, including its use in Isaiah 7:14. I find it very interesting that of those 7 appearances, the overwhelming majority of 10 English language translations I checked always translate the word into English as virgin only once in Isaiah 7:14. Every other time it's translated girl, maid, young woman, maiden, or something like that. Even in the case of Isaiah 7:14, 3 of the 10 English language translations drop a footnote offering young woman as an alternate translation. The New Century Version's footnote is the clearest of the 3, saying, quote, "The Hebrew word means young woman." Most surprising to me was that the New World Translation renders Alma as maiden in Isaiah 7:14, a tip of the hat to the Jehovah's Witnesses, not something I say very often. Clearly, the meaning of Alma is a matter of significant dispute only when the Christian doctrine of the virginal conception of Jesus is at issue. Quite frankly, it seems much ado about relatively very little. Only 2 of the 27 books that comprise the New Testament make the claim that Jesus' mother was a virgin when he was conceived. Of those 2, only one, namely Matthew, attempts to link this claim to the Hebrew Scriptures, using a passage that, as we've seen, fails to get the job done. None of the other writers of the New Testament even hint at a virginal conception. The earliest, or at least one of the earliest Christian canonical texts, Paul's letter to the Galatians, simply says that Jesus was, quote, born of a woman. He uses the Greek word gune, which means woman or wife. It seems clear that for Paul, Jesus being the Son of God did not depend on Jesus' mother being a virgin. As Paul puts it in Galatians, Jesus was God's Son, born of a woman. My own opinion is that Paul and most, if not all, early Christians knew nothing about the claim that Jesus was born of a virgin. The idea developed later and first appears in the Gospel of Matthew, approximately 40 years or more after Jesus' death. But I digress. Now, some Christians will point to the fact that the Septuagint translation of Isaiah 7:14 uses the Greek word parthenos, which almost always means virgin. And while that's true, it's worth noting that the Septuagint translation of, for example, Genesis 34:2-3, a passage that talks about a woman who's definitely not a virgin, uses parthenos. So it doesn't always refer to a virgin. The last nail in the coffin of the Matthean appropriation of Isaiah 7:14 is that the passage is not a messianic prophecy. This becomes crystal clear when one reads the passage in context. It's part of a story about Yahweh sending the prophet Isaiah to Ahaz, king of Judah, to talk about the threat to Ahaz and his kingdom posed by the alliance of the northern kingdom of Israel and Syria in the 8th century BCE. The story says nothing about the Messiah. It doesn't even hint at anything messianic. Simply put, the author of Matthew misquoted and misapplied the passage. Okay, C, Isaiah 53, perhaps the granddaddy of misquoted and misapplied passages. From the earliest days of the Jesus movement, Christians have seen Jesus in the words of Isaiah 53. See, for example, Acts 8:26-39, which tells a story about a eunuch courtier of the Queen of Ethiopia being converted to Christianity by the Apostle Philip, who explained Isaiah 53 to him. Speaking of eunuchs, it's worth noting that in his Against Celsus, written in about 248 CE, the church father Origen, who took Jesus' commandment about making oneself a eunuch for the kingdom literally, in any case, Origen recounts a disputation held with certain Jews who were reckoned wise men about Isaiah 53. Origen's Jewish interlocutors contend that Isaiah 53 refers, quote, to the whole Jewish people, regarded as one individual and as being in a state of dispersion and suffering. Origen basically dismisses them as obviously wrong, opining that the suffering servant of Isaiah 53 is none other than Jesus himself. Now, here's the thing. Origen's Jewish interlocutors presented Isaiah's answer to the question asked by Origen's Ethiopian counterpart back in Acts 8:34. Who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else? The prophet was talking about Israel. How can one know? Well, Isaiah 53, along with the last three verses of Isaiah 52, comprises the fourth of four servant songs that start in the 41st chapter of Isaiah. The servant is repeatedly, consistently, indeed exclusively identified as Israel. 41:8, Israel my servant, Jacob whom I have chosen. 44:1, O Jacob my servant, and Israel whom I have chosen. 44:2, O Jacob my servant. 44:21, remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. You are my servant, O Israel. 45:4, Jacob my servant, and Israel my chosen one. 48:20, his servant Jacob. 49:3, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Now, the most concise and the most amusing Christian apologetic response, more correctly, dismissal of what the text of Isaiah actually says, appears on a Messianic Jewish website called lightofmashiach.org. It says, quote, the servant, though called Israel, isn't the nation. The servant isn't the nation of Israel, but instead is Messiah called Israel, despite the fact that the text repeatedly, consistently, and indeed exclusively identifies the servant as Israel. The apologists at Light of Mashiach insist that it is not Israel. I've said it before, folks, but it bears repeating. Christian apologists are ready, willing, and able to ignore what biblical texts do and do not say in favor of their preferred positions. So there are our three examples of misquoted and misapplied passages. There's much, much more that makes up the messianic prophetic portrait that Christians present. And over this coming summer, I'm going to be looking at other parts of it in videos, including some of the goofier ones. For example, Matthew's forlorn attempt to fulfill Zechariah 9:9 by having Jesus ride into Jerusalem on two animals, characterized by commentators at the New American Bible as, quote, an awkward picture resulting from Matthew's misunderstanding of the prophecy. For now, though, it seems fair to say that the prophetic portrait of Jesus presented by Christians is, at best, extremely unimpressive. Thanks a lot.